In the next few years, it became clear that a lot of people were interested in learning not only about this, but in actually doing it. And as they did it, they found a great deal of benefit, reassurance, and strength to meet the other difficulties of life. And so certain retreats that we had, which provided longer periods of the centering prayer practice, and also deeper instruction, inspired some people to want to teach it themselves. So it began to be taught in more and more places. The response justified the feeling that this was not just coming out of some merely human attitudes or a certain loyalty merely to the particular tradition I come out of as a religious persuasion, but that really spoke to something, a great need in human beings right now. And that implies that somehow there was to be some great movement going on in the heart of God. The next concern was, once we knew that this concern was coming from an inspiration of the Spirit, was to figure out a way of organizing in some degree the way that we delivered this method or this message. And it was obvious that we needed to find ways of nourishing people as they progressed in their practice of centering prayer. And to do this, we required people who could teach them adequately and who were qualified not only by doing it, but through practice, so that they could communicate this method in the best way that we possibly could do so that people learning it could have a better chance of contacting this experience of God that is so secret, so hidden, but so refreshing, so reassuring, so strengthening, so protective, so loving. In 1984 and 85, we felt the need to establish a structure which we called Contemplative Outreach to serve as a resource for the spiritual network and to develop programs that could respond to the needs of the future and the growing organism. Its general purposes, of course, was to foster the practice of centering prayer in its immediate conceptual background, to keep in touch with the membership of the spiritual network, and to develop practices and programs that would further the contemplative dimension of the gospel in everyday life. We continually tried to listen to the needs of those who were doing the prayer, those who belonged to the spiritual network, whose only requirement is to do the practice. We wanted to keep feeding or nourishing or supporting or evoking the kind of response that the Holy Spirit was asking of people who were immersing themselves in the values of the inner room. And as you know from our earlier talks, the centering prayer is simply a way of detailing that general formula that Jesus suggests in Matthew 6:6. When you pray, enter your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Abba, Father, in secret. And your Father who is in secret will reward you. I might paraphrase it to say, will take care of everything else. Because the whole thrust of the prayer is to turn the practitioner over to the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, who becomes the prayer. As Paul says, the Spirit prays within us with unspeakable groanings. Well, this is not words, obviously, but is great desire. In any case, we want to address that vast population, which in my experience, having traveled in many places in the world now, I see crosses all boundaries geographically and all denominations, and indeed all religions. As time went on and we refined our purposes and prayed more deeply and experienced the presence of God at ever deepening levels of our being, it became clear to us that we also needed people who could teach it to others and who wanted to do so. This is not something that always happens in the beginning. Then we needed people who were qualified to teach it to others. So that implied something more, a training that would be specific and draw on the experience of many people in teaching it to provide various programs that would address the different levels of growth that people were now experiencing. So now the spiritual network of Contemplative Outreach is a multi-layered people who are experiencing the practice at different levels and who need special food for the concerns and issues that arise at those levels. And finally, we need fundamentally the practice, then the disposition, then the qualifications to teach it, and then the resources of a material kind to bring this about. They're all part of the same vision of communicating the method in the most universal and comprehensive way that we can do this, given our limited talents and qualifications, but trusting in the Lord, who from a single concern expressed almost casually to a few other similarly minded people, that expressed not just a human loyalty to a tradition that happened to be the one I came from, but which was a movement of the Spirit expressed in the way that God seems to prefer. Well, anyway, this continues to evolve. It then gradually brought us to the point where we wanted to bring together all our purposes and express them. And in the fundamental book that describes the method of centering prayer, I list the first three that we perceived, and which and that book was published in 1986. They're very important. And the first three goals that we had for Contemplative Outreach were these: to renew the Roman Catholic contemplative tradition. That was the fundamental motive that started off our Contemplative Outreach vision. But closely associated with this was the fact that already by that time we had discovered that people of other denominations, other Christian sects, were just as interested as many Catholics that we had met. And so we recognized, and we had no choice almost in recognizing, because of the extensive character of this interest, that this method was designed for all Christians. And with moments of reflection, it was obvious that the tradition which comes out of that text of the gospel, and which was refined among the fathers of the church, and more particularly by the fathers and mothers of the desert of the 3rd and 4th centuries and beyond, and the whole monastic tradition, That belongs to the Protestants and to the Anglicans and to of course, the Orthodox Christians. And so our next purpose was to make the Christian contemplative heritage as available as we could to all the other Christian denominations or sects or divisions as their common property. And we saw or felt strongly, and it was our experience from praying together from these different denominations, that this centering prayer and bonds people in a way that is very deep and transcends doctrinal difficulties, not in the sense of denying them or their importance, but of simply focusing or emphasizing the experience of the living Christ rather than on doctrinal differences. So we left to each one to pursue or to follow, as their conscience demanded, the formation that they had received of a religious nature and their own theology. In centering prayer, it's not the time to think. So we only ask people to do the prayer and to experience what is deeper than thinking or theology, deeper than consciousness itself, which is the presence of God within each of us, and a presence that has been identified as Abba by Jesus, a loving presence of God that we're all drawing from as we pray together, and which then relativizes some of the differences that grew up as a result of the Reformation and arguments over particular doctrinal matters. Obviously, these have to continue in order to find unity at that level. But we can say that we found unity at a deeper level. And hence, it was our purpose, therefore, to share equally with our Protestant brothers and sisters the whole of the tradition as we understood it and knew it, including its monastic wisdom, and in a sense, centering prayer is a kind of distillation of the Christian monastic experience. And so that was our second purpose. The third purpose was also recognized at that time, and it perhaps comes, it certainly has been reinforced by my own experience. I've engaged in a great deal of InterReligious Dialogue. Not far from us at Spencer was a Buddhist center, and many outstanding teachers who were teaching there sometimes visited us to see what the Christian monastic scene was. And I engaged in many other events. Perhaps one of the more significant interreligious events was the creation of a committee of monks to dialogue with the monastic traditions of the other world religions. Most of them have one. And so this enabled people with experience to be talking together about what helped them the most in their own tradition to advance in the spiritual journey. And some of these insights we found were very helpful in helping us to see some of the hidden depths of the Christian contemplative tradition, that only dialogue or the emphasis that some other tradition gives to it and the benefits that they experience from that, so that there's an enormous amount to be learned from interreligious dialogue, which has advanced a long way from where it was, which was in total ignorance of each other, but still has a long way to go in order to grasp the higher reaches of all the traditions and just how this relates to the ultimate reality and the ultimate experience of God. So those were the first three objectives we had. And I think we can say that we have made some headway in all three of them. At least we have raised the level of consciousness in the Roman Catholic community that the contemplative prayer is available as a method, It expresses the uninterrupted tradition of centuries of monks and nuns and mystics who practiced it, and that it's available to all the Christian community, baptized and those with only a desire for baptism. In other words, it's available for everyone with grace. And this brought us to a new insight, and that is that there may be some very profound truth in Rahner's saying that nature itself is graced. Theology had distinguished nature and grace and almost made them opposites for certain centuries of reflection or in certain schools of theology. But if nature is graced, that means that everybody is, through other sources than religion even, can taste the presence of God. That God manifests himself through nature, through intense service of other people, through conjugal love, through art, through any number of ways that elicit a sense of God's presence. We mustn't deprive God of his freedom or think that he has to work in a specific way. All that we are doing in contemplative outreach, and I presume this is the purpose of all the world's religions, is to provide the instruction and support and the symbols that are designed to help the majority of the population to reach union with God. And the fourth purpose is to make the prayer available to everyone as a method. And we noticed that when we introduced it to prisons, that many men on the yard were not interested in a particular religion and would not come to the chapel. So they were beyond the reach of the ordinary volunteer systems of the different religions that try to bring inspiration and consolation and support to prisoners. And this was especially noticeable in the Folsom State Prison, where the inmates themselves gradually took control or possession of teaching others in the prison how to do this prayer. And they didn't do so aggressively, but they could talk to men on the yard, and when these men saw the changes in their fellow inmates, they began to get interested in the prayer, and as they got interested in the prayer, it began to change them, and it began to make them more open, and as some of them explained, they began to attend the church services just as they were. So God's mercy is so vast, and God's determination to save everyone is so strong, and his special desire, if that's the word for it, to not just save people in general, but to transform them at the roots of their being and bring them to the fullness of love is such that he seems to want us to extend every possible means possible to touch people where they are. And if they have no religion at all, then we have to present them with a kind of method that they can relate to. And this is what has been done in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. The only requirement is to believe in a higher power, which can be anything higher than we experience ourselves to be. But it's that first step of letting go of the intense selfishness and self-centeredness of the ego that gives God an opening. And with the opening, then, begins to the image of God begins to be reassert itself. It can never be lost, hence it can always be reawakened. And so we have to extend our ideas of God's mercy as much farther than we think it goes, because we can never come to the end of it. And finally, we saw then, obviously, that as we extend the availability of this prayer to people, we have to extend its effects to the whole of creation, especially to this planet, and to the other animals, and to the plants, and to the minerals, and to the subatomic world. In other words, we have to embrace with admiration and love all of God's creation, however big, however tiny, or infinitesimal. And this vision then brings us around to the final conclusion, that in the end, everything is one. Everything has the same source, the same presence of God is in everything that exists, big or small, and that this presence is manifesting an intelligence that is totally at the service of infinite love, of unconditional love. And so this then has become the vision of contemplative outreach. And let me conclude by reading you that vision, which summarizes everything I have just said. Contemplative outreach is a spiritual network of individuals and small faith communities committed to living the contemplative dimension of the gospel in everyday life through the practice of centering prayer. The contemplative dimension of the gospel manifests itself in an ever-deepening union with the living Christ and the practical caring for others that flows from that relationship. Our purpose is to share the method of centering prayer and its immediate conceptual background. We also encourage the practice of Lectio Divina, particularly its movement into contemplative prayer, which a regular and established practice of centering prayer facilitates. We identify with the Christian contemplative tradition and heritage. While we are formed by our respective denominations, we are united in our common search for God and the experience of the living Christ through centering prayer. We affirm our solidarity with the contemplative dimension of other religions and sacred traditions, with the needs and rights of the whole human family, and with all creation. We could have added one more bottom line, and that is, God is all in all. And since God is love, divine love is all in all. And it's out of this fundamental vision that everything else we do flows. And it is this vision that inspires the movement to bring everyone else to this knowledge and this taste and this experience of the oneness and goodness of all that is.
Life has become exceedingly hectic with the chaos of working families, busy schedules, travel.
If I continue in that sort of frenetic pace, I find that I forget about God.
There's a tremendous thirst for meaning in our lives. And contemplative outreach fills that vacuum, that void.
In the 1970s, 3 Trappist monks, Father William Menninger, Father Basil Pennington, and Abbot Thomas Keating, distilled a method of prayer called centering prayer to renew the ancient practices of Christian contemplation.
All of us have been in silent conversation with God from the beginning of time. God's first language is silence. In this brief time that we have, that we walk the earth, when we have quiet moments, something happens to us. Something begins to be reborn in us that is unbelievable.
Centering prayer is a method of opening and consenting to God's presence and action within us, a way of establishing a relationship with God that grows deeper and deeper in intimacy, understanding, and self-surrender. We let go of our ordinary psychological awareness and turn inwardly to the center of our being and to our spiritual faculties of intellect and the will to God, and to access the source of true happiness rather than look for it in external things or in other people or in ourselves apart from God.
To just say, okay, twice a day for 20 minutes, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit and I'm going to surrender to God, and I'm going to let him come in and do with me what he will.
We sit and God heals.
Before centering prayer, God was sort of an intellectual or theological construct in my life. And now it's the God who loves me, the God who wants to make Teresa the best Teresa that there can be.
My only knowledge of what happens during centering prayer is afterwards. It's in the fruits.
I feel greater love for all that I encounter, and a much greater acceptance of what's going on. Difficulties that crop up are there to teach me, as opposed to things to get rid of.
I find myself more compassionate than I've ever been.
It's often changes that we don't see at first, but our spouses, our families see.
We commit to God transforming us, and it enriches the rest of my life.
These people have learned centering prayer with the help of Contemplative Outreach, led by Father Keating.
Contemplative Outreach is a spiritual network of individuals and small faith communities committed to living the contemplative dimension of the gospel in everyday life through the practice of centering prayer.
We speak of Contemplative Outreach not as a organization, but as an organism, as something that's alive and healthy and growing, the spiritual family.
The vision of Contemplative Outreach is, first of all, to try to renew the contemplative mystical tradition from earliest times. Secondly, I see contemplative prayer as the point of unity between the Christian denominations. And finally, we're in a better position to dialogue with the great spiritual traditions of the Eastern religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, who also have a very rich contemplative tradition.
Contemplative outreach is touching people of all faiths, all religions, all denominations, and it is causing us to recognize anew and afresh that there is a union in prayer